A gruff voice from the seat behind Lena Harper cut through the quiet hum of the bus. Could you try to keep your child still? She's taking up the entire seat. Lena flinched, her arms instinctively tightening around the small, sleeping form nestled against her chest. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice hoarse with fatigue. She's just asleep. I'll move her. But before she could shift, her daughter Mia stirred and let out a sharp cry that seemed to vibrate against the frosty windows of the cross-country bus. Lena's heart plummeted. The driver shot a frustrated look into his rearview mirror. Ma'am, can you please quiet her down? Folks are trying to travel in peace. I'm trying, Lena pleaded, gently rocking Mia. The chill of the snowy night between Denver and Santa Fe seeped through her thin coat, and her hands shook from exhaustion after a long journey to a new, uncertain life. Shoo, baby, please, she murmured, on the verge of tears herself. Mia's cries only intensified. Passengers turned to stare, phones were quietly raised, and a wave of judgmental whispers and eye-rolls swept through the coach. Then, a calm, warm voice spoke from beside her. Excuse me, would you mind if I tried something? Lena turned, startled. A man sat across the aisle, perhaps in his mid-30s, dressed in a way that seemed too refined for this late-night route. He wore a fine navy wool coat, and his leather gloves rested on his lap. His eyes were surprisingly kind. He offered a gentle, reassuring smile. I have nieces, he explained. Sometimes a different set of arms is all it takes. Lena hesitated. Life had taught her to be wary, to never depend on anyone. But Mia was inconsolable, and the weight of everyone's disapproval was crushing. She gave a slow nod, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. With great care, she passed Mia into his arms. The man, Ethan, took the child with a practiced ease, tucking her securely against his chest. He bounced her slowly, whispering something too low for Lena to hear. Incredibly, Mia's sobs subsided into soft hiccups and then quieted completely. Lena stared, amazed, as her daughter snuggled into the stranger's embrace, content and safe. She seems to like you, Lena whispered. She's warm and exhausted, that's all, he answered softly. Lena's own body finally surrendered. Her head grew heavy, and without realizing it, she leaned against the man's shoulder. He didn't shift away or say a word. He simply adjusted his own position for her comfort, then quietly slipped off his coat and gently wrapped it around Mia, ensuring the fabric kept her warm, all without drawing any attention. It was an act of such simple, profound kindness that it required no words. Lena slept deeply. She awoke with a jolt and a small, panicked gasp. She blinked, seeing the warm, expensive fabric around Mia, then looked up to find her daughter still sleeping peacefully in the man's arms. Oh, my goodness, she whispered. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. I must have. The man smiled, his voice as calm as before. It's perfectly all right. You were worn out. Anyone would be. If I had a child, I'd only hope someone would offer help when I was struggling. Lena was at a loss for words. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such unprompted kindness. Mia stirred, blinking her sleepy eyes. Her tiny voice cut through the silence. You smell like warm, she mumbled, before burrowing back into his chest. Ethan chuckled, and a blush crept up Lena's cheeks. Her name is Mia, Lena said, a small smile finally gracing her lips. And I'm Ethan Caldwell, he replied, still holding the toddler as if she were precious. It's a pleasure to meet you both. The bus began to slow for Lena's stop in Santa Fe. This is us, she said, a note of reluctance in her voice as she reached for Mia. Ethan passed her over gently, making sure the coat remained wrapped around the child. Thank you, Lena said, managing to meet his gaze. I don't know what I would have done tonight without you. Ethan gave a modest shrug. You would have managed. You're doing a wonderful job. Lena stepped off the bus, standing on the snowy sidewalk and watching as it pulled away into the night. The windows glowed faintly, and she caught a final glimpse of Ethan's profile before he vanished. She held Mia closer, the heavy wool coat still cocooning the little girl. "We won't see him again," she whispered, "but he was nice, wasn't he?" Mia mumbled in her sleep, and for the first time in a very long time, Lena Harper felt a little less alone in the world. The small rental apartment above the laundromat had a faint, permanent scent of damp clothes and cheap detergent. Lena pushed the door open with her shoulder, balancing Mia on her hip while a single plastic grocery bag dangled from her other hand. The door groaned shut behind them with a familiar complaint. Mia whimpered softly, rubbing her eyes. Lena set her down on the worn-out couch, wrapping her in a thin blanket before shrugging off her own coat with a weary sigh. The radiator clanked and hissed, putting up a valiant but losing battle against the winter chill. She crossed to the tiny kitchen and stared into the nearly barren refrigerator. There was enough for one more meal: canned beans, a couple of slices of bread, and half a carton of apple juice. Payday was 3 days away, and the landlord's note, written in angry red ink, was still tacked to the door: final notice. Lena collapsed at the small table, her face in her hands. She had been searching for a second job all week, night shifts, weekend cleaning, anything to make ends meet, but no one had called. Mia had developed a nagging cough, which meant the daycare had sent her home early twice, and Lena's hours at the roadside cafe were cut yet again. Her body ached with a bone-deep fatigue, but her mind refused to rest. Yet, through the swirling storm of stress, a quiet memory surfaced: the bus, the warmth of another person's coat around Mia, the steady, calming presence beside her. That rare sensation of not being completely on her own. Ethan Caldwell. She didn't even know his last name, and he hadn't asked for hers. But in that moment when the world felt impossibly heavy, his shoulder had been her sanctuary. She shook her head with a sigh. Men like him didn't truly enter her world, not beyond one quiet, fleeting encounter on a snowy night. 2 days passed, and Mia's cough grew worse. Lena gave her warm baths, rubbed her chest with ointment, and read her stories until her own voice grew hoarse. She fueled herself with cold coffee in the mornings and hurried along slick sidewalks to make her shift at the cozy mom-and-pop cafe, slipping behind the counter just before her manager could reprimand her. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when it happened. The little bell over the door jingled. Lena was refilling a chipped mug with coffee when she glanced up and froze. Ethan. He stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat and scanning the room before his eyes found hers. He smiled. "Hello," he said. "I didn't expect to see you again." Lena nearly dropped the coffee pot. She set it down with a clatter and wiped her hands on her apron, her heart thumping against her ribs. I didn't either," she managed, forcing a shaky smile. "Small town, I suppose." Ethan looked around the cafe, then back at her. "Busy today?" "It depends on the hour," she replied, her voice unsteady. "Would you like a table?" "Just coffee," he said. "Black," she nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she grabbed a clean mug. She poured the coffee and set it on the counter where he had taken a seat. "Thanks," he said softly. She nodded again and turned away, pretending to wipe down a tray. Ethan said nothing more. He just sat there, sipping his coffee, watching her work. There were no questions, no expectations, just his quiet presence. And Lena, though her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, felt a sliver of that same calm she'd felt on the bus. The morning air was brittle, clinging to her skin through her coat. Lena walked down the wet sidewalk, her breath misting in front of her. She was early. Mia had finally slept through the night, and Lena decided to walk slowly, to savor the rare moment of quiet before the day's grind began. But as she neared the cafe, she slowed her pace. Something was hanging from the front door handle, a paper bag. She looked around, but the street was empty except for the distant sound of traffic. Cautiously, she approached the door and unhooked the bag. It was heavier than she expected. She opened it slowly, and her breath caught in her throat. Inside were 2 boxes of children's juice, a small bottle of cough syrup, a box of tissues decorated with cartoon animals, and tucked between them, a folded note. "I think Mia might need these." Lena's fingers tightened around the note, her chest aching with a raw, unexpected emotion. She hadn't told Ethan that Mia was sick. She hadn't told him about the things she could barely afford. He had simply noticed, and he had acted. Quietly, without announcement or expectation. She carried the bag inside and set it on the counter, staring at it for a long time. Her hands trembled. One part of her heart swelled with gratitude, while the other clenched with a familiar discomfort. Was this kindness, or was it pity? The bag sat behind the counter all day. Lena worked her shift as usual, taking orders, wiping tables, refilling coffee, but her thoughts kept returning to it. To Ethan. To the way he hadn't said a word about seeing her working there, how he had watched but not judged. Still, something twisted inside her. When her shift ended, she didn't go home. She waited. At 5:30, just as a cold rain began to fall again, the bell over the door jingled. Ethan stepped inside, just as he had 2 days before. Lena stood behind the counter, her arms crossed tightly. He noticed her stance immediately. "Hi," he said. "We need to talk," she stated, her tone sharper than she intended. He nodded slowly and approached the counter. "All right," she didn't soften. "I found the bag, I hoped you would," he said. "I didn't ask for your help, no," he agreed. "You didn't, then why?" Her voice cracked, a battle of anger and confusion raging within her. "Why would you do that? You don't know me," he met her gaze, his expression calm. "Because you're raising a daughter alone, working long hours, and you still find a way to be gentle with her. Because I saw you on that bus, holding everything together while it felt like the world was falling apart," her throat tightened. "I'm not a charity case," she whispered. "I never said you were," Ethan said gently. "Then what am I to you?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You're strong. You're doing something that would make most people collapse. I didn't leave that bag because I thought you were weak. I left it because I see how fiercely you're fighting." Lena's shoulders slumped slightly, and her eyes stung with unshed tears. "I don't know how to accept things like that," she murmured. "I don't expect you to," Ethan replied. "Just know it came with no strings attached. No pity. Only respect." She looked at him for a long moment, torn between her stubborn pride and something deeper. Then, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Ethan, sensing she needed no more words, simply smiled and took his usual seat at the counter. The sun peeked through the bare branches surrounding the local park, casting a soft golden light on the sidewalk still damp from the previous night's rain. It was colder in the shade, but Lena had bundled Mia up snugly in her jacket, a small knit hat covering her curls. Ethan walked beside them, his hands in his coat pockets, his pace unhurried to match theirs. Lena had been hesitant when he first asked. Coffee had become a familiar routine, but a weekend walk felt like something more. Yet, something in his voice, in the quiet sincerity of his gaze, had persuaded her to agree. They strolled past a playground where children's laughter and breath fogged in the crisp air. Mia clung to Lena's leg for a while, shy, but eventually, she reached up to take Ethan's hand. Lena's breath caught, but Ethan simply smiled, adjusting his stride to accommodate Mia's tiny steps. They found a bench overlooking the frozen lake, and Mia sat between them, holding a biscuit in one hand and her ever-present stuffed rabbit, now frayed and patched, in the other. Ethan leaned back. "Do you come here often?" "Not really," Lena admitted. "Only when I have enough energy to walk instead of taking the bus." He glanced at her. "You seem more rested today." Lena gave a small laugh. Looks can be deceiving. There was a comfortable silence, broken only by the wind rustling through the trees. She looked down at Mia, who was humming to herself. Then, Lena spoke. "Her father left when I was 3 months pregnant. He said he wasn't ready, that I was ruining his life." Ethan remained quiet, letting her speak. "My mom was my only support, but she passed away before Mia turned 1. Cancer. It was quick and cruel. After that, it was just me. Juggling rent, diapers, everything. Her voice trembled slightly. There were nights I'd hold Mia while she was crying, and I'd be crying right along with her. Ethan's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. I stopped trusting people, Lena added softly. Not because I wanted to. Because I had to. Mia tugged on her sleeve, and Lena kissed the top of her head. Ethan looked out at the icy water. My mom raised me alone, too, he said quietly. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment. She worked 3 jobs. I remember nights she would sleep on the floor so I could have the bed. She never once complained about how tired she was. Lena turned to him, surprised. I remember she sold her only winter coat so I could go on a school trip. I didn't find out until years later. At the time, she just smiled and said it wasn't a very cold week. Lena felt something shift deep inside her. Ethan continued, I know what it's like to be broke, to hear people say you'll never amount to anything, to feel small because of the number in your bank account. But I also know love when I see it. And I saw it in the way you held Mia that night. Lena's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. I've been lucky, Ethan said. Things changed for me. I worked hard, I invested, and somewhere along the line, I became the guy people assume was born with a silver spoon. But I never forgot where I came from, or the woman who taught me to never judge a person by their wallet. Just then, Ethan stood and motioned for them to wait. He jogged over to a small vendor cart nearby. A few minutes later, he returned with a brown paper bag. He knelt in front of Mia and pulled out a small, soft stuffed bunny with one ear slightly bent. It looked almost identical to the worn-out rabbit she clutched. For you, Ethan said gently. Mia stared at it, her eyes wide, before slowly reaching out to take it. Lena was speechless. How did you, she began. I noticed hers was falling apart, Ethan said, standing up. I found one that was a close match. Mia hugged the new bunny tightly, not dropping her old one, but nestling them together. Lena looked at Ethan, a fragile, questioning look in her eyes. No one has ever done anything like that for her. Or for me. Ethan shrugged. Maybe it's time someone did, and in that quiet moment, Lena felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, trust. Not a fleeting hope or a distant dream, but the simple, grounding belief that maybe, just maybe, this man wasn't going anywhere. The afternoon light slanted through the cafe's windows, painting warm stripes across the faded linoleum floor. Lena wiped down the counter for what felt like the 5th time, more out of nervous habit than necessity. The lull between the lunch and dinner rushes was the only time the place was ever quiet. Mia was with a neighbor, finally over her cough, and for a moment, Lena could just breathe. The bell over the door jingled softly. She looked up and saw Ethan step inside. He wasn't in a suit, but a sweater and dark jeans. He still looked neat and out of place among the chipped formica and sticky menus. He gave her a small nod and took his usual seat at the counter. You're early, Lena said, setting down her cleaning cloth. I figured I'd catch you before the dinner crowd, Ethan replied, settling onto the stool. Something about the way he sat, the thoughtful expression in his eyes, made her pause. He wasn't just here for coffee today. What's on your mind? She asked. Ethan hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a slim, folded pamphlet and placed it on the counter between them. Lena glanced at the title, The Sanctuary, a support network for single mothers. We opened our 3rd center last month, Ethan began, his voice calm but serious. We provide housing assistance, job training, childcare support, legal aid. It's grown faster than we anticipated. We're at a point where we need strong leadership. People who truly understand what it means to walk through that fire. Lena listened, her heart beginning to pound, unsure where this was headed. He looked her directly in the eye. I want you to join us. Full time. As a coordinator for one of our support hubs. She blinked. Me? You, Ethan said simply. You know what this life demands. You've lived it. You're smart, you're compassionate, you're resilient. You don't just survive, you carry others with you. That is exactly what the women at the sanctuary need. The room felt like it was closing in on her. She took a slight step back, her hand brushing the edge of the counter. I don't know what to say. Ethan tilted his head. Say you'll think about it. She swallowed hard. Why me? Because I believe in you, he said. I've seen you in your toughest moments, holding your daughter, wiping her tears even when you had your own. You've been honest with me. You haven't asked for a single thing, and that makes you the kind of person I can trust with everything. Lena crossed her arms, suddenly feeling exposed. I didn't ask for any of this, she said quietly. I didn't ask for you to bring me gifts or offer me a job. I know, Ethan said, his voice unwavering. That's why I'm offering, not giving. There's a difference. She shook her head. It still feels like charity. Like I'm your project. Your good deed for the month. His expression shifted, a flicker of hurt in his eyes, but not anger. Lena, he said gently. I didn't seek you out because of guilt. I didn't invite you into my life because I think you're helpless. I offered this because you're powerful. Because I see a leader in you that you don't see in yourself yet. She opened her mouth to argue, but he continued. I grew up with a mother who was exactly where you are now. She worked nights, she went without meals so I could eat, she smiled when she was breaking inside. And I watched the world judge her, talk down to her. But she never let it break her. He leaned forward, his voice quiet but intense. I remember watching her sleep on the floor so I could have the bed. She never told me we were poor, she just lived with love. She taught me what real strength looks like. And when I saw you on that bus, exhausted, carrying your child, and still finding the strength to be kind, I saw her. Lena felt her throat tighten, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. I'm not trying to save you, Lena, Ethan said. I'm asking you to join me. Not because you need me, but because the sanctuary needs someone like you. The words resonated deep within her. For a long moment, Lena said nothing, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her heart screamed yes, but her scars whispered no. I can't, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan didn't push. He simply nodded. I understand. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of apology and fear. I'm just not ready. I don't know if I can be who you think I am. Ethan smiled softly. You already are. Later that night, Lena walked home slowly under the dim glow of the streetlights, Mia's hand wrapped around two of her fingers. The air was crisp, the town buzzing faintly in the distance. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but somewhere deep inside, a part of her had begun to wonder, what if she said yes? The snow had been falling without pause since dusk, a relentless, cold sheet drumming against the windows of Lena's small apartment, blurring the streetlights into hazy orbs. Inside, the air was thick with worry. Mia lay on the couch, her cheeks flushed, her small body radiating a frightening heat. Lena sat beside her, a damp cloth in one hand and her phone in the other. The urgent care clinic had closed early because of the blizzard. The 24-hour pharmacy said a delivery would take hours. Mia whimpered, her breath coming in shallow pants. Lena's heart clenched with a terrifying helplessness. She tried her neighbor, but there was no answer. She called her manager to say she couldn't make her morning shift, and they hung up on her. Then, without another thought, she called Ethan. He answered on the first ring. Mia's really sick, Lena said, her voice cracking. She's burning up. I'm coming, Ethan said, cutting her off gently. Stay with her. I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, a firm knock came at the door. Lena opened it to find Ethan, soaked from the storm, holding a bag of medicine in one hand and a small thermos in the other. I stopped by the late-night pharmacy, he said, stepping inside and shrugging off his wet coat. I got the fever reducer, electrolyte packets, and some warm ginger ice soup they had. Lena stared at him, stunned. You. You really came. He looked at her and gave a small, almost teasing smile. Of course I came. He placed everything on the table, then knelt beside Mia. Hi, sweetheart, he whispered, brushing her damp hair from her forehead. Rough night, huh? Mia whimpered again. Let's try this medicine, Ethan said softly, and then I'll tell you the best story you've ever heard. Lena watched in silence as Ethan cradled Mia in his lap, coaxing her to drink the medicine with patient, soft words. When Mia's eyelids finally began to droop, he pulled out one of her storybooks and read, his voice calm and warm, as steady as the storm outside. Lena couldn't look away. When Mia finally drifted into a deep sleep, her breathing evening out, Ethan set her down gently and covered her with a blanket. Then he turned to the small kitchen counter and poured some of the soup into a bowl. Let her have this in the morning if she's up for it, he said. Lena stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. You didn't have to come, she whispered. It's the middle of the night, Ethan shrugged, setting the bowl down. That's when people need someone the most. Lena stepped forward, her voice shaking. I don't know how to do this. Be cared for, he turned, his eyes meeting hers. All my life, she said, people have left. Mia's dad, my mom, friends. Every time I've needed someone, they've vanished. So I just stopped expecting anything. It hurts less that way. Tears streamed down her cheeks before she could stop them. Ethan crossed the room and placed a gentle hand on her arm. You don't have to do this alone anymore, he said quietly. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. Suddenly, a sleepy voice piped up from the couch. Mommy? Lena rushed over. Yes, baby, I'm right here. Mia reached out, but instead of for Lena, she wrapped her small arms around Ethan's neck as he knelt beside them. If you were a pillow, she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep, I'd never want to let you go. Ethan laughed softly and pulled her close. Then, still holding Mia gently, he looked up at Lena. I'm not going anywhere, he said, his voice full of conviction. You and Mia. You're home now. My home. Lena stared at him as silent tears fell. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. In that quiet, messy, real moment, he leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was gentle and sure, and filled with every unspoken word that had passed between them. When they pulled apart, Lena rested her forehead against his, her fingers threading through his. I don't know how this will work, she whispered. Ethan smiled. Then let's figure it out. Together, outside, the snow began to ease. Inside, something new had just begun, soft and certain, like a love that grows slowly but is destined to stay. Spring crept into the city, softening the sharp winds and coaxing pale blossoms from stubborn branches. For the first time in years, Lena greeted the new season with something that felt like hope. She had said yes. Yes to the job, yes to the cause, yes to a life that was about more than just survival. At the sanctuary, she found herself surrounded by women who were echoes of her former self, young, tired, and afraid. Yet every day, she stood before them not as a broken woman, but as living proof that healing was possible. She arranged daycare, trained volunteers, and ran workshops on budgeting and navigating single-parent resources. Her days were long and often chaotic, but they had meaning. She came home each night to Mia, who now ran into Ethan's arms as naturally as she ran into her own. Together, Lena and Ethan launched a new project, an affordable housing development tailored specifically for single mothers, complete with on-site childcare, support staff, and a safe playground. One afternoon, as they toured the construction site, blueprints in hand and hard hats on their heads, Lena paused at a sign being painted near the gate. She squinted. Wait. Is that what I think it is? Ethan smiled, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. The sign read, Mia's Haven, a new beginning for every mother and child. Lena's throat tightened. She touched the freshly painted wood. For her, she whispered. For both of you, Ethan said. But mostly for her. Because she's the one who gave you your strength, and you gave it to me." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she blinked them away, overwhelmed. Weeks passed, and the building neared completion. Lena flourished in her role, her confidence growing with every decision she made. Ethan was always beside her, not to lead, but to support, to trust her judgment, and to believe in her even when her own faith wavered. Then one evening, while organizing documents at the office, Lena accidentally opened an email left on Ethan's screen. It was from an international investment firm, offering him a multi-million-dollar contract to return as CEO of a tech conglomerate in Europe. A contract he had declined. The date on the email was from 3 months ago. Lena froze. Later that night, as they walked home together beneath the soft glow of street lamps, she couldn't keep it in any longer. "You turned down that job," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her, then nodded. "I did. It was everything. Money, power, prestige," she said, stopping on the sidewalk to face him. "I know. Why?" He looked at her, his eyes steady and clear. "Because I already have everything I want," Lena's voice cracked. "You gave up all of that. For me." Ethan stepped closer. "Not for you. Because of you. You showed me what really matters. You reminded me that the best investment I could ever make is in people. In a home. In love." He cupped her face gently. "Because you, Lena. You are everything," and in the soft, perfect silence that followed, she wrapped her arms around him, knowing, finally, that this love wasn't something she had stumbled into by accident. It was the love she had earned, the love that had found her right when she needed it most. The new sanctuary building stood tall and bright under the golden afternoon sun, its fresh coat of paint gleaming, its windows wide open to the early summer breeze. Outside, a crowd gathered under a white tent, filled with mothers, children, volunteers, and supporters, every face lit with optimism. Lena stood at the podium, her hair caught in a gentle wind, her voice clear and warm as she spoke into the microphone. "I used to believe I was invisible," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I used to think that because life had been hard, because I was a single mom scraping by, that I didn't have value. That I had to survive in the shadows." She paused, glancing at the front row where Ethan sat with Mia on his lap. The little girl waved when their eyes met, making Lena smile. "But then someone reminded me that strength isn't silence. That pain doesn't mean weakness. That motherhood is not a limitation, it's a superpower." Applause rippled through the audience. "I'm standing here today not as someone who was rescued, but as someone who was reminded of her own worth. I now know I have value, and I promise to spend the rest of my life helping other women see theirs." As the applause grew, Lena stepped back, blinking away tears. She turned to leave the stage when Ethan stood and walked toward her. He took her hand and turned to the crowd. "Before you all go," he said with a nervous laugh, "there's something I need to ask." He dropped to one knee. Gasps and delighted cheers erupted from the crowd. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant ring. His voice was steady, but his eyes were filled with emotion. "Lena Harper, you gave me more than love. You gave me purpose. You gave me Mia. You gave me a future I never knew I was missing." He looked up at her, his expression so soft it made the world seem to fade away. "You gave me hope, and you gave me a family. Will you marry me?" Lena's hand flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, nodding vigorously. "Yes, Ethan. Of course, yes." The crowd erupted into cheers as he slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a deep embrace. Mia ran up and wrapped her arms around both of them, squealing, "Now we're a forever family." A few weeks later, they held a small wedding in the very park where Ethan had once given Mia her new bunny. White chairs lined the green grass, soft music floated on the air, and Lena wore a simple lace dress that made her glow. Mia walked ahead of her, proudly scattering petals from a small basket, dressed in a white dress with a pink sash. Ethan stood at the altar, tears already in his eyes. When Lena reached him, they held hands and whispered their vows, their love speaking more loudly than their words ever could. They kissed to cheers and applause, and as the sun dipped lower, they wandered to an open field just beyond the ceremony. Lena, Ethan, and Mia sat down on a small plaid blanket beneath a sprawling tree. The sky above was painted in streaks of amber, pink, and gold. Ethan wrapped his arm around Lena. Mia curled up between them, her head resting on Lena's lap. "Do you think sunsets ever get tired?" Mia asked sleepily. Lena laughed softly. "No, baby. They're just taking turns with the moon." Ethan squeezed Lena's hand, and as the sky grew dim and fireflies began to dance in the twilight, the three of them sat there, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, watching the day end and a new life begin. Together. Always.